And when we've been stuck in emotionally charged, unproductive communication, we really weren't able to focus on finding a solution to the problem.
No.
Like none of us can get there in that moment because we're overly focused on being right and kind of getting our own way and ultimately trying to absolve our pain. Right? We've been stuck there more times than we want to admit. And it's such a painful place to be. Welcome to the Blended Family Coaching Show, where you'll discover how to move your step family from just surviving to truly thriving.
Grab your headphones and listen in as we share practical, real-life strategies for building healthy bonds,
Understanding the kids' perspective,
romance and partnership,
parenting with great teamwork.
and yes, even co-parenting with a difficult ex.
We're Mike and Kim Anderson, and we believe with the right tools, every step couple can overcome the common challenges of step family life.
Join us for authentic and sometimes comical conversations to discover how you can lead your family with confidence and create the future you really want.
Well, hey there. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. We know that your time is valuable, and it's really humbling for us to know that you use some of it to spend with us. And you may or may not know that every other week we share a simple step here on the show. It's a quick, action-oriented tip to help you take another simple step forward in your blended family. But the catch is we only drop it out on the podcast. We don't share it on social. We don't send emails out about them. Only those who are following us in their favorite podcast app gets any of them. Mm-hmm. So make sure to follow the show over on Spotify or Apple Podcasts so that you don't miss any of those simple steps. And while you're there, we would love for you to leave a rating or a review. Your feedback is so important to us. Now, another thing that we found critically important in our journey is communication. I know. I just heard a bunch of listeners say, well, duh, tell me something I don't know, right?
Yeah, and if you're anything like us, that thought might have quickly been followed by something like, well, I wish we could communicate better, and we probably could if he would just or she would only, and, fill in the blank with just about anything you don't like about the way your spouse communicates with you.
That's right.
Especially in those difficult conversations around sensitive topics.
Oh, for sure. I don't know how many times over the years that I blamed you for our communication problems. I'd either build resentments quietly, just kind of internally ruminating over all the things that I disliked about your interactions with me, or you probably remember this more. I'd lash out at you, telling you all about your communication shortcomings and kicking off yet another disaster of a conversation.
Right. Yeah.
And then I'd wonder why the heck we couldn't seem to get it together. And there were those moments that I realized one of the primary things that was robbing us of an ability to communicate well, it was that over focus on the blame game. We both kept focusing on how terrible each other was at communicating in those tough moments. But then we just kept doing the same things that we always did. And every time a disagreement, big or small, would hit, we'd be left feeling disconnected and frustrated with each other.
Right.
Neither of us felt heard. We even started questioning if we were going to make it.
Yeah, we were kind of living out that old insanity cycle, right? When you keep doing the same things you've always done, guess what? You'll keep getting the result you've always gotten.
That's right.
And we just kept blaming each other for our communication breakdowns, and it was kind of like a standoff. We both just were waiting around for the other person to do something different and to change.
Yep.
Until finally we started learning solid skills, simple tools, and we each individually got serious about putting these tools into practice. Now, both of us had to let go of our expectations that the other one would change.
Right.
And instead, each of us took responsibility to change how we showed up by putting these effective communication skills into practice. And that's what we want to focus on today. And it took us a while to actually practice this skill, but once we made it part of our regular communication, it really made a big difference for us. Now, before we hop right into the tool, let's back up a bit to a story that some of you who've been listening to the show for quite a while, you might have already heard this story, but it's a great example of a communication breakdown.
For sure. This disastrous camping trip that was the straw that broke the camel's back for us, and was certainly a moment that highlighted how our lack of communication skills completely hijacked our connection as a couple and really even as a whole family. So just a quick recap for those who may not be as familiar with the story of this big blowout fight that we had while camping with our whole family back in about 2010.
Yeah, I think it was around then.
Yeah. Now, leading up to the trip, we did a pretty good job of talking about some expectations and limits that we wanted to put in place with Annika around her cell phone use during the camping trip. So if you're new to the show, Annika is Kim's daughter from a previous marriage.
Right.
She was 5 when we got married.
And she was around 15.
At that time,
At the time, yeah.
Yeah, so we came into this agreement about what the boundaries was going to look like around the cell phone. Then, as her bio parent, you talked to Annika about the boundaries before we left for the trip so that she knew what to expect.
Yeah.
And we all got started on the same page.
Yeah, we did. And then something unexpected happens, right? Which often does for most of us in blended families or just family life in general. The first day of our trip, Annika and I both had a pretty major head cold coming on, right? And our illness got progressively worse on the trip. We were both lethargic and pretty miserable. As a result of the unexpected circumstances, even though I'd agreed to setting cell phone boundaries with Annika, I just figured it wasn't a big deal to get laxed on the boundary. Well, actually kind of remove it altogether.
That's probably more accurate, yeah.
Because Annika was miserable, and really the only thing she had the energy to do was sit around and do nothing. I mean, she really had no energy at all. So she was bored. So why not just let her veg out with her phone, right? At least it was keeping her occupied. Plus, I was miserable and I didn't have the energy or the motivation to enforce the boundary anyway. So it kind of made sense to me at the time to just kind of dismiss our original agreement. And I made that decision without discussing it first with you, honey.
Yeah.
And primarily that was because I was afraid of how you'd react. And I really just wanted to avoid conflict. And I had a really, really bad headache. There were also some underlying emotional issues going on for me as well when it came to parenting Annika.
That's right. And meanwhile, I'm watching all this unfold, and Annika's sitting there with her phone for hours, and you're not saying anything. I'm feeling stuck because I've learned over the years that as the bio parent, you need to be the one responsible for any discipline or correction. So I felt like I just had to keep my mouth shut. But honestly, I was fuming on the inside.
You were.
And I wasn't fuming just because Annika was on her phone. It was because I felt like you were completely ignoring our agreement. And that triggered a lot of pain in me.
Right.
For the most part, I felt abandoned. And I believed that you were really not capable of partnering with me around parenting decisions and, dealing with Annika.
Right.
It was a moment of feeling like the stranded stranger in a very intense way. And in my pain and frustration, I exploded. I accused you of flaking out and letting Annika get away with whatever she wanted. I used really harsh words to label you and her, and I just kind of let loose verbally.
Right. And that caused me to feel like that trapped teammate in between my child and between you.
Yep.
And then I tried to defend myself by offering some explanation, but you didn't want to hear any of that.
Right. To me at the moment, those were flimsy excuses, and it got me even more worked up because now you weren't even taking responsibility for ignoring our agreement. And so my angry kind of outburst escalated. I got louder. My body language started getting big and overbearing.
And that was really scary for me.
Sure.
So then I withdrew. I tried to avoid you and really avoid the issue as much as I possibly could.
Right. And when you withdrew from me, my sense of abandonment got even stronger because now you weren't willing to address the problem. And that made me start to believe that you weren't even trying to partner with me. And that felt really hopeless. And so, as I tend to do when I'm in pain like that, I decided I was just going to take the bull by the horns, right? I'm going to take control. If you were going to make a unilateral decision that Annika could do whatever she wanted, then I would also make a unilateral decision that our trip was over. So I just started packing up, tossing everything into the minivan. And of course, I did it pretty aggressively. Yeah.
Very aggressively, I'd say. So even though we were scheduled to spend 3 more days on this camping trip, our trip was suddenly over.
Yep.
We were both experiencing high levels of frustration and pain, and our kids were exposed to some toxic conflict between us. And unfortunately, they missed out on a fun vacation too.
Yeah.
All because we were unable to effectively communicate about a sensitive issue, and we allowed our painful emotions to dictate our behaviors.
And this was sensitive for us, honey, because I know you've shared often that you were a permissive parent, and this kind of thing had played out for us many times before. And like I said earlier, this incident was just really the straw that broke the camel's back for us. It wasn't just like a single isolated incident.
No, I mean, I had gotten a lot better
You
at
had,
that
yeah,
point.
you
I
had
mean,
been
she was
working on it.
15, so I definitely had learned some parenting skills.
Right.
But when circumstances changed, I really felt I had a right to readjust and figure things out for my child.
Yeah. Which is a challenge in itself because there is some truth to that.
Yeah.
There is a right to say, hey, I think things need to change. But at the same time, what we're trying to build is unity.
Right.
And the truth is, sensitive topics for blended family couples can be around all kinds of things. It's not just this that we're talking about.
Right.
I mean, we know that parenting is often the hot topic, but conflict can also erupt around all kinds of other issues too.
Exactly. Everything from, the cap not being put back on the toothpaste.
Oh, that's a big deal.
Yeah, I know. It is for you.
I know.
To, how we're going to negotiate with an ex-spouse. Little things, big things, little things that have become big things, right? There's no shortage of sensitive issues that can easily escalate in a highly charged emotional conversation that ends in ongoing conflict and pain.
Yeah, we've lived that reality in our own relationship over and over and over. And we hear about these situations all the time from the couples that we get to coach and those that reach out to us for help when they're just stuck and unable to communicate about something. What if you could experience a community that's all about healthy support, guidance, and practical strategies that help you thrive in your blended family? Well, now you can. Blending Together is a supportive community for blended family couples just like you.
We've educated and supported hundreds of couples navigating the unique challenges of blending a family. Now we're inviting you to join our community and experience the transformation that awaits you. But you'll need to act fast because we're getting started soon. Blending Together is not just another community. It's a place where you'll find practical, real-life strategies for building unity as a couple,
And creating more connection as a family.
experiencing partnership in parenting.
And even dealing with that difficult ex.
Blending Together is a safe, growth-focused space where you get to connect with us and, maybe more importantly, with other blended family couples who truly understand what you're going through. Along the way, you'll discover practical tools, guidance, and hope that empower you to find a future full of confidence and connection.
When you join Blending Together, you'll get to hop into a variety of resources like access to our private Facebook group and online learning platform, monthly coaching meetings, monthly Q&As, and you'll even get to vote on the content for our monthly workshops.
Blending a family can often leave couples feeling alone or isolated and stuck, and quality support can sometimes be expensive. That's why we're offering you access to all of this at a super low monthly rate, because every blended family deserves the opportunity to thrive, regardless of their budget.
That's right. So join us in the Blending Together community and unlock the secrets to successful blending. Together, we can create a future filled with hope, connection, and peace. But don't wait. Click the link in the show notes now. The doors will be closing on October 8th, and you don't want to miss out on this unique opportunity to create the future you really want alongside other couples who genuinely get it. Hey, we can't wait to meet you there.
And what we also know to be true is that most of the time, these frustrated couples are competing against each other, and they reach out to us asking for our professional opinion around which one of them is right and which one is wrong.
Yeah.
Without really realizing it, they've got an unspoken feeling that there must be a winner and a loser.
Yeah, one of us has got to be right.
Yeah, and this is where we used to get stuck too, right? Fighting against each other, demanding that our way is the right way, and in the process, hurting each other and causing a lot of damage to our relationship and feeling disconnected.
Yeah. And when we've been stuck in emotionally charged, unproductive communication, we really weren't able to focus on finding a solution to the problem.
No.
Like none of us can get there in that moment because we're overly focused on being right and kind of getting our own way and ultimately trying to absolve our pain. Right. We've been stuck there more times than we want to admit. And it's such a painful place to be.
And we don't want that for you.
No.
Which is why we're sharing a specific strategy that we've been practicing and honing over the years in our communication that has helped us to begin or start out a sensitive discussion in a way that really helps our communication be more productive. And this tool can help you to minimize the negative emotions that so often drive those unproductive reactions and keep us stuck, and instead increase your ability to stay united and solve your problems.
That's right. Now, you might be surprised at how simple the tool seems on the surface. And before we get to it, let's just share a little bit of insight into why sensitive conversations often tend to go downhill so quickly. So I discovered this in a communication training at a previous job years ago. We were studying a book called Crucial Conversations, which was developed by a group called Vital Smarts. And they shared some research that revealed it's the first 30 seconds of the conversation that typically sets the trajectory for the entire conversation. They call that the hazardous half minute.
Right.
So I began to learn that there were a few elements of that hazardous half minute that can significantly influence the overall success of a difficult conversation. And as I'm listening to this training, I started to realize that this was critical in my communication with Kim, too. It wasn't just about my workplace communication. So along with practicing some new skills at work, I decided I was going to be really clever. And I thought, okay, I think I'm going to start practicing this at home with Kim as well. And what I started to notice over time is that it was working. Our conversations started getting a little bit better, just a bit more productive than they used to be, little by little by little. It wasn't a magic formula that made every conversation perfect from that point on. But as I kept at it, practicing and practicing and practicing, I started realizing that the ratio of productive conversations compared to unproductive ones was starting to shift.
Right. We had less conflict.
Yeah, we were getting better at hanging in there, even when it was a tough topic. And ever so slowly, we were getting better at staying connected, even when we didn't necessarily see eye to eye.
Right. That's absolutely it. And after you started noticing things were going better, when you started those conversations with me, you began sharing with me what you were doing differently.
Yeah.
And I started practicing this skill as well. We both chose to do something new and break out of that insanity cycle, right? So it really starts with simply being mindful of that hazardous half minute before we even start a sensitive conversation with our partner, knowing that we want to show up well and work toward a productive conversation that doesn't go downhill on us in the first 30 seconds, right? And then we want to put the skill to work by intentionally thinking through a few simple things before we jump in and start this conversation. And this is where our handy dandy tool comes in.
Right.
So helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And we've adapted what I learned all those years ago from Crucial Conversations to fit our family-focused conversations as opposed to communication in the business world.
Right.
We call the tool an FAQ conversation. And that's an acronym. It stands for facts, assumption, and question. And when you want to initiate a conversation that you think might be difficult, what you're going to do is you're going to start by stating the simple objective facts that were observed. That's that F, the facts. You'll then share the story in your head or the assumption that you're making as a result of those facts. And then you'll end with a question that invites the other person to share what's going on for them in the situation.
Right. You get curious.
That's right. Now, something to keep in mind before you actually launch into this is that you're going to need to choose your timing.
Yeah.
Do your best to be thoughtful about choosing a time when you're both as calm and undistracted as possible. Back on that camping trip, I would have needed to pull away and calm myself down a little bit before I just jumped into my FAQ strategy, because tone, body language, all that stuff matters.
Yeah.
And it comes through if we don't calm ourselves down.
Yeah, sometimes right in the heat of the moment is not the best time to launch into a conversation.
Oh, I got a million more stories about that. Yeah, I'm really good at that.
But that's a really good point, you just made. We need to be able to calm ourselves, and we're each responsible for how we choose to manage our own emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And believe it or not, how we handle our emotions, it's a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your tendency, honey, is to lash out and get angry and controlling.
That's been my MO.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I tend to withdraw and avoid.
Yeah, it's your MO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But both of these are equally destructive when we're attempting to connect and communicate.
For sure.
It's not always the big volatile reaction. Sometimes it's the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
But it is possible for each of us to choose to learn some healthy ways of managing those tough emotions so that we don't overreact or get stuck in our pain, which honestly, that's not going to help us solve problems and move forward.
No.
So learning to manage your emotions is a critical piece of being able to engage and communicate well with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And this was something we've learned to do.
Absolutely. And, if you feel like you need a little bit of help just with that piece, if you tend to react in negative ways that impede your ability to communicate, we want to encourage you to reach out. Maybe see if our Relate Strong program is a good fit for you.
Mm-hmm.
We've gotten to support so many couples to deploy the skill of emotional regulation, even when they're experiencing pain and conflict in their relationship. So get help with this if you need it. And if it's not from us, find someone that can give you some really practical tools and strategies to manage difficult emotions in the moment so that you don't have to get hijacked by them. Or you might check out episode 35. It's called, Are You Controlling Conflict, or Is Conflict Controlling You? Mm-hmm. And we'll put a link in the show notes if you want to go learn the strategies for managing those difficult emotions when tough conversations come up. There's a few pointers in there.
Yeah. Okay, so once you've regulated your emotions, it's time to start the FAQ conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So back to our debrief of this disastrous camping trip, right? If we could go back in time, honey, and you had been able to manage your emotions well in that moment of stress and remain calm and rational, what facts, so that's the F, what facts would you have identified? What would be the F in that FAQ conversation with me?
Good question. I think the facts probably would have sounded something like this. Really simple. Honey, I've noticed that Annika's been on her phone a lot more than we originally agreed to.
Right. So the facts are plain and simple, right? No one can dispute the facts because we're just stating what's actually happening without adding any meaning or motive to that.
Oh, that's key. Exactly. And often when we're communicating our facts, we can start off with something like, I've noticed. That's a really great way to start talking about facts.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the moment either. It could be like, yesterday I noticed that you used the credit card to make a purchase when we agreed that we would only use it for emergencies. Or last week I noticed that Johnny didn't do his chores and they still haven't been done, right? That's a whole week later. And all you're doing there is stating the objective facts without any judgment or disapproval or negative body language, right? We're trying to stay as neutral in our tone and our body language as possible, and really managing our emotions as we're going through the process.
Yeah, great. So no one can dispute the facts. On our trip, had you stated those facts the way you just shared in your example in a calm and rational way, there's no way that I could have disputed them. I mean, it was right there. Yeah. And what I love about starting a conversation with the simple facts is this approach doesn't evoke a defensive reaction.
Yeah, it doesn't need to.
When you said what you actually did say on that trip, which was very accusational and insensitive, of course, I'm going to react defensively and end up withdrawing because, you know what, my feelings were hurt.
Yeah.
But when you start with just stating the facts in a calm way, you're opening up the conversation from a place of mutual understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Reality is what it is. The facts are the facts. And now we can take it from there. Without stirring up all the hurt feelings and the painful emotions right out of the gate.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate hearing just the facts.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
helpful for me.
Mm-hmm.
What's next, honey?
Okay, well, next is the A, right, which is about assumptions. Now, it would be unrealistic to think that when our partner does or says something that rubs us the wrong way or even goes against our expectations and agreements, that we aren't going to form some sort of story in our head about their meaning and their motive, about what they really want to do. Because as humans, we naturally add meaning and motive to the behaviors that we observe in those around us.
Right.
So, honey, when I noticed that the boundaries that we agreed on for Annika's cell phone usage weren't being upheld, I immediately formed a story or an assumption about your motives.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what were those?
Well, some motives about that I thought you didn't really care about our agreements. Like it felt like you wanted to let Annika do whatever she wanted. You were not really interested or, I don't know, capable, I guess, of making the parenting decisions that we needed to make together. And your motives were all about preserving Annika's comfort and I guess your own comfort as well, because you didn't want to uphold those boundaries.
Right. Okay. So you jumped to some conclusions or assumptions about my motives in this situation.
Yep.
What meaning did you add?
Oh, the meaning, I guess I would describe that as just feeling like I was ignored and abandoned. Like my input wasn't valued. That was the meaning that was being put through, right? You're going to do whatever you want to do, regardless of my perspective. So I'm just left feeling unheard. I don't really matter. Like a lot of kind of self-loathing stuff.
So if you'd been able to manage your emotions well and start the conversation off by stating the facts, how would you have communicated your assumptions? How would you have delivered the A in that FAQ conversation?
Yeah, well, first I want to acknowledge that what's going on in my head are assumptions and stories. And I want to be able to separate those from the facts and clearly communicate them up front before I react to my story. So here's what this might have sounded like altogether, like stating the facts and then my assumptions. Okay. It would have sounded something like, honey, I've noticed that Annika has been on her phone a lot more than we originally agreed to, right? That was the facts. Now here's my assumption. That makes me think that you don't care about our agreement and that my perspectives aren't important to you.
Okay. So again, what I love about this is that you aren't actually accusing me of anything.
That's right.
You're just sharing what's going on in your head.
Yeah.
And when you start with that sentence, that makes me think.
Yeah.
Or sometimes I've heard you say, I've got a story in my head. When you say that prior to sharing your assumption, that really helps me to stay calm because you're admitting right out of the gate that it's just a story.
Yep.
And then you're not really sure if it's truth or at least not the whole complete truth.
Right, right.
And honestly, I need to know what's going on in your head and you need to know what's going on in mine, right? If we want to partner well.
Yeah.
But on that trip and in thousands of other previous conversations, we really didn't understand each other's pain and perspectives because we weren't able to communicate clearly about what we were each experiencing, right?
Right. And so we're able to share our assumptions as just that in a moment like this, as a story that we've added motive and meaning to, but we're not confusing those things with the facts.
That's important.
Right? So we're inviting our partner then to engage with us in two specific ways when we do it this way. First, we're helping them to gain an understanding and some empathy for our experience because we're stating it as, hey, this is what I'm experiencing.
Yeah, this is the story in my head.
Yeah. And then second, we're setting the stage for our last step in the FAQ conversation, which is the Q. And that's where we're going to ask a question that invites our partner to share their truth and their stories as well.
Okay, so this one is really simple. What's the question, honey?
I'm almost universal in this one. I almost ask the same question every time, and it sounds something like, I'm wondering what's really going on. Or sometimes I might say, can you tell me what's really going on for you?
Right. So it's an open-ended question that's inviting me to either confirm or correct your assumption.
Yep.
And inviting me to share my own facts and assumptions about what's going on, about the situation.
Yeah.
So let's just play this out as if we were back all those years back.
What, we're going to get in a fight?
Well, no.
Oh, okay.
No. But we are going to go back in time a little bit. On that camping trip on the Oregon coast, what was it, like 12 years ago,
Yep.
in the middle of this very sensitive, highly charged situation. You're feeling like a stranded stranger. I'm feeling like a trapped teammate.
Yep.
And we're going to use the FAQ conversation tool to start a conversation instead of doing what we did, which was not good.
Okay, so we're going to play out what
let's
we
try it.
should do instead.
Yeah.
So instead of getting angry and controlling, first thing I would have needed to do is like pull away and take some deep breaths,
Right.
calm myself down, and then think through, okay, what are my facts? What's the assumption? And how can I invite Kim to share what's going on?
So
for
there's
her?
some forethought.
So a little bit of I need to like prepare for this. I'm not just going to calm down and then, okay, now I'm going to march over and talk to her. Right?
Yeah,
That
you're
doesn't
going to
work
think
either.
it through. What are my facts and assumptions?
So, boy, Annika's been on the phone. It makes me feel like Kim is just abandoning our agreement. But I want to, because there's got to be something else. So I got to figure this out. So I do all that. I'm calm. I figure it out. And then I come to you and I say something like, honey, I've noticed that Annika's been on her phone a lot more than we originally agreed to. That makes me think that you don't care about our agreement and that my perspectives aren't important to you. But I wonder what might really be going on.
Okay.
Yeah. And now notice how I said it too. Well, like we said, calm. My demeanor's good. You can probably hear in my voice that I'm not, I'm not shaking my tiny fist at you or anything like that.
It's kind of just matter of factly. You're just kind of very neutral.
Yeah.
Now, I still might have been a little hesitant because this had been an ongoing touchy topic for us. But instead of jumping into defensive mode and then withdrawing to avoid you, I would have felt safer to share what was going on for me, which may have sounded something like this. Honey, Annika and I are both sick and exhausted, which was something that we didn't anticipate and was out of our control. Honestly, I don't think I have the energy to enforce the boundary, and I feel like it's okay for her to use her phone since she doesn't have the energy to do anything else right now either. I do value your perspective, and I had every intention of upholding our agreement, but when the circumstances changed, I let things slide, and I should have talked to you about how I was feeling. So, I definitely would have had a better chance of being able to state my facts and my side of the story without feeling judged or attacked.
Yeah.
And I might have been able to even own my part without getting defensive too.
Yeah. And, I think that response, had it been delivered similarly to the way that you just did, and with, some sort of words like what you just said, it probably would have gone a long way in helping us to get some mutual understanding, which likely would have calmed me down even more.
Right.
I would have had a better idea about the truth from your perspective. I mean, I knew that you and Annika were up all night coughing and you didn't get much rest. I knew that your energy levels were low because, I'm sometimes I'm a little dense, but I do know the beach is your like number one happy place, and you were just sitting there like a bump on a log.
I couldn't even
clearly
enjoy it.
Yeah, there was something else going on, but that was the truth from your perspective. And had we used the FAQ tool back then, I'm pretty confident that we could have been able to collaborate together and work through the problem much more efficiently. It might have still been bumpy and it might have been challenging, but it would have been so much better.
Oh, yeah, I agree. It would have been a huge improvement because instead of working against each other and engaging in conflict about, who's right and who's wrong, we could have worked together from a place of mutual understanding. I also see now with some hindsight, it's been a few years, that had I been proactive and initiated an FAQ conversation right when the circumstances changed, we could have avoided this whole conflict altogether.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so what would that have sounded like?
Well, it might have sounded something like this. Honey, I know we agreed on boundaries for Annika's cell phone usage, and I think those boundaries are reasonable, but we didn't expect that she and I would get sick on the trip. So those would be my facts,
okay,
right?
Okay.
So let's move on to the assumptions. The story in my head is that you still expect me to enforce those boundaries, and I'm afraid you're going to get upset with me if I don't. I really think we need to reassess the boundaries at this point, but I'm wondering if we could start by you helping me understand what's going on for you.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that would have been pretty great, actually. That proactive response would have been helpful. And I don't think that I would have had time to build up my negative story in my head about you, especially if you'd approached it really early on. And honestly, it was the negative story that was what was fueling my anger and frustration.
Yeah.
It wasn't about the phone.
Yeah.
It was about me feeling like you were ignoring our agreement and feeling abandoned. So if you'd been proactive like that, you would have caught me at a place and time where there weren't any negative motives or meanings added to what was going on in the first place. And I think I could have responded in a pretty reasonable way at that point. And to add to that, you would have been inviting me in to partner with you, which is a real bonus for me.
You love that.
When we feel like when I feel like we're partnering, that's a really good place for me. That's like way better than feeling like you're just making a unilateral decision without my input. So again, had this conversation happened before I jumped to my assumptions and experienced those painful emotions of abandonment, things would have been very different for us on that trip. I think so.
We probably could have finished the whole trip rather than cutting it 3 days short, right?
I know we lost 3 days of our family time.
And that would have been so much more fun for the kids.
Yeah.
And if we had been skilled at practicing more effective communication tools back then, we may have never ended up in that season where we thought we might lose our marriage altogether. We were really struggling.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we've learned a lot since then about healthy, effective communication, and we've been able to put this FAQ tool into action. And yes, it's made a huge difference in our relationship. Instead of reacting to our own emotional pain and being insensitive in how we approached sensitive topics, we've learned how to share our facts and our assumptions, and then ask a question to invite each other in when we're initiating a conversation around a sensitive topic.
Yeah.
We've both chosen to move from a critical mindset to a curiosity mindset, and this has strengthened our ability to stay connected and to work through problems more effectively without getting stuck.
For sure. So we want to invite you to give it a try. Next time you need to talk about something that's been bothering you or something that you know is a touchy topic, before you jumped into, highly charged emotional conversations and end up with lots of negative beliefs about your partner, stop and try something different. Calm yourself down, think this through, identify the facts that you observed, state them as objectively as possible. Figure out that assumption. What's the meaning and motive that you're adding to the story that you're telling yourself in your head? And make sure you invite your partner to share by asking that question at the end. And then it's really, here's the real key. Listen.
Yes.
Like when you ask the question, just patiently listen to what they have to say and then begin to work through it. And so much of the research shows that when we get this hazardous half minute right, it radically changes the trajectory of our conversations. Now, like I said before, it's not a magic formula.
No.
But it takes practice, and we just keep trying and we keep trying. So if it doesn't work the first time, it's okay. Try again. Keep after it. So the FAQ conversation is not complicated or hard to do. It's really your choice.
And you can do something different.
That's right. Okay. Well, you know what? We've been talking about friendship and communication and all that over the last few weeks. And in fact, last week we had a simple step that I was talking about earlier. You got to make sure that you're following our show over on Apple Podcasts or over on Spotify to grab those simple steps. And there's two things that we've been sharing, one last week and one's coming up next week, that might help you in that moment to figure out how to calm down before you enter into the FAQ conversation.
Yes,
so
check those out.
Make sure you're following, catch those simple steps, and then we'll see you in a couple weeks for another great blended family topic. But for now, that's going to make this episode a wrap.
Until next time.